My husband cheated with his coworker for months. But when I caught them at the boss's party, I exposed everything in front of 50 people and destroyed their careers. Now he's living homeless. I'm 36 years old, work in office administration, and 6 months ago I finally signed the divorce papers from what was a marriage of over 10 years. And honestly, I never thought it would end like this, with my ex living like he's homeless and me feeling lighter than ever. But well, I guess I have to start from the beginning, so everything makes sense. David and I met when I was like 24. He was 25. And at first, everything was amazing. You know, the typical honeymoon phase where everything is perfect and you think you found your soulmate. We got married 2 years later. I was 26 and I was convinced we were going to have that perfect magazine life, with kids and a nice house and all that. But things started to change like 3 years into the marriage. I don't know exactly when it happened, but suddenly we were more like roommates than spouses. You know what I mean? Like, we shared the bed, but there was nothing else there. We talked about the weather and what we were going to have for dinner, but never about important things. Never about us. The worst part was when we decided to try to have kids. I was like 30 years old and I thought, well, maybe a baby will bring us closer together. We'll bring back that spark we had before. We went through 3 IVF treatments, and each one was an emotional and physical hell that I wouldn't wish on anyone. The hormones made me crazy. The costs were absurd. We're talking thousands and thousands of dollars, and David was getting more and more distant. After the 3rd failed attempt, we kind of gave up without saying it out loud. We just stopped trying and kept living together like 2 strangers who share expenses. We literally lived like roommates, who occasionally had obligatory sex like once every 2 months, if that. The last few years of my marriage were basically that, an empty routine where I went to work. He went to his office at this marketing company where he'd worked for like 6 years, and at night we'd watch TV in silence, until we went to sleep. I knew I wasn't happy. David didn't seem happy either, but neither of us did anything to change the situation. I think we were both too comfortable in our unhappiness. Sounds weird, but that's how it was. Like a year and a half ago, David started talking a lot about this Ashley, a new girl who had started working in his department. At first, I didn't pay much attention. Like, normal for him to talk about his coworkers. But then it was Ashley this, Ashley that. Ashley has such great ideas. Ashley is so funny. Basically, Ashley became part of our daily conversations, and that seemed weird to me. One day, like 6 months before everything exploded, we were having dinner, and he left his phone on the table, and I saw a message from Ashley come in with a heart emoji. I asked him what was up with that, and he laughed and told me it was just an inside joke from the office, that Ashley was like that with everyone, super affectionate and all, that it didn't mean anything. I wanted to believe him. I mean, what else was I going to do? Accuse him without proof of something that maybe was just in my head. But things got weirder. David started going out more often after work. Supposedly, they were happy hours with the team or business dinners, and I stayed home watching Netflix alone, which wasn't really that different from when he was home because we didn't talk anyway. In November of last year, like a month before New Year's, I saw more messages on his phone when he was in the shower. This time they were full conversations. Nothing explicit but definitely flirty. Like her saying she missed seeing him and him responding with heart emojis too. When I confronted him, he got mad at me. Told me I was being paranoid and insecure, that Ashley was just a friend, and that I was ruining his friendship with my jealousy. And I, like an idiot, felt guilty and apologized. Can you believe it? I apologized to him for suspecting something that turned out to be totally true. Then December came, and Benjamin, David's boss, announced he was going to throw a huge New Year's Eve party at his mansion. And when I say mansion, I'm not exaggerating. This guy had an incredible house on the outskirts of the city with giant gardens and everything. David was super excited about the party, more excited than I'd seen him in years, and he told me it was important that we both go because it was good for his career for Benjamin to meet me. I really didn't feel like going, but I thought, well, maybe it'll be good for us to go out and do something different together. On the night of December 31st, we arrived at Benjamin's house like at 8 in the evening, and it was all super elegant. There were servers with trays of champagne and gourmet food, live music, decorations everywhere. Basically, it was the type of party you see in movies. There were like 50 people there, most from David's work, some with their partners and others alone. David introduced me to a couple of people, and then basically abandoned me to go socialize with his coworkers. I stood there with a glass of champagne, feeling totally out of place. After like half an hour wandering alone around the party, a guy came up to me and introduced himself as Matthew. Said he was Ashley's husband and that he'd seen me arrive with David. I told him yes, that I was David's wife, and he seemed relieved to find someone in the same situation, like abandoned partner at an office party. We started talking, and honestly, Matthew was a nice guy. He was like 35 years old, worked in construction, and he told me that he and Ashley had been married for like 4 years. He told me that Ashley also talked a lot about David lately, that apparently they worked very well together and were good friends. I just nodded and didn't say anything about my suspicions because, well, what was I going to say? Hey, I think our spouses are having an affair, but I'm not sure. Matthew and I spent most of the night together because our respective spouses were busy networking or whatever. Like at 11 at night, Matthew told me he hadn't seen Ashley in a while and that he was going to look for her. I hadn't seen David either, now that I thought about it, and suddenly I felt like a stab in my stomach. That instinct that tells you something is wrong. I told Matthew that I didn't know where David was either, and that maybe we should look for them together. We checked the whole house, all the rooms where there were people, the dining room, the living room, we even went to the second floor, but nothing. Then Matthew suggested we check outside, in the garden, and I already had a bad feeling, but I followed him. We went out through the glass back doors that led to the garden, and there were fewer people there because it was cold, like there were some small groups smoking or talking, but nothing else. We walked toward the back of the garden where there was less light, and that's when we saw them. David and Ashley were standing, near some bushes, very close to each other, and as we got closer, I literally saw her lean in and give him a kiss on the cheek. But it wasn't a quick, friendly kiss. It was one of those kisses that last too long, you know? Where the person basically rubs their face against yours, and David was smiling like, I hadn't seen him smile in years. Matthew stopped dead next to me, and we both just stood there watching them like idiots. I felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest and my hands started shaking, not from sadness but from pure rage. Like, there was the confirmation of what I'd suspected for months. Matthew yelled something at them. I don't remember what exactly, but they both turned to look at us with faces of absolute panic. David tried to walk toward me with his hands raised like saying, wait, I can explain, but I was already walking back to the house. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to make a scene right there in the garden. Matthew was behind me, and you could hear Ashley crying and saying something, but I didn't care. When we got back inside the house, Matthew and I went straight to the bar and ordered strong drinks. He was in shock, like literally shaking, and I was trying to process what we'd just seen. I think we were silent for like 5 minutes until Matthew said, we have to do something. We can't let them get away with this, just like that. And that's when I came up with the plan. I don't know where the idea came from, but suddenly it was there in my head complete. I told Matthew, look, there's like half an hour until midnight. At some point, David and Ashley are going to come back inside the house because it's New Year's and people are going to want to be inside for the countdown. The house has those huge glass doors that lead to the garden, right? And right now they're covered with thick curtains because it's cold. What if we tell everyone that there are going to be fireworks outside at midnight and that Benjamin prepared a special show in the garden? Everyone's going to want to see, so they'll open those curtains, and we can make sure that right at that moment David and Ashley are outside doing, well, whatever they're doing. Matthew looked at me like I'd just suggested something completely crazy, but then a smile appeared on his face and he said, that's brilliant, let's do it. We separated and started circulating the rumor around the party, like, hey, did you hear that Benjamin is going to do a fireworks show at midnight in the garden? It's going to be incredible. We should all be near the windows to see it. People believed it completely because, well, Benjamin was a millionaire and had this absurd house, so why wouldn't he hire fireworks? Like at 11:40, Matthew and I went out to the garden again and found David and Ashley together again, this time sitting on a bench somewhat hidden. We told them it was really cold outside and they should come in, but they said in a bit that they wanted to be outside for midnight. Perfect. Matthew and I exchanged looks and went back inside. We told people that the fireworks were going to start exactly at 12, that Benjamin wanted everyone to be looking toward the garden, and a couple of people offered to open the curtains when it was time. At 11:59, everyone was gathered in the main living room with their glasses of champagne, shouting the countdown, 10, 9, 8, and I was standing there with my glass shaking in my hand, not knowing if this was going to work or if I was going to make the biggest fool of myself. 7, 6, 5, and someone opened the curtains. 4, 3, 2, 1, and right at that moment everyone shouted, "Happy New Year," and looked toward the garden, expecting to see fireworks. But what they saw was my husband and Ashley kissing on the mouth under the garden lights, completely oblivious to the fact that 50 people were watching them through the windows. The silence that followed was deafening. Literally, the whole party went quiet watching the scene, and I saw the faces of Benjamin and the HR lady who were right in front, both with expressions of complete horror. Someone even took out their phone and started recording. I don't know who, but I saw the camera flash. Matthew was next to me, and we both just stood there watching as our spouses kissed, without realizing they'd been exposed in front of all their coworkers, their bosses, basically in front of the people who could ruin their careers. David and Ashley finally separated, and that's when Ashley turned toward the house and saw all the faces watching them. I saw her turn completely pale even from that distance, and then she said something to David and he turned too. The expression on his face was pure panic, like he'd just realized that his life was about to explode into 1,000 pieces. They both got up from the bench and ran toward the side of the house, I guess toward where the cars were parked, and we watched them disappear into the darkness. Inside the house, people started murmuring. Some laughed uncomfortably. Others looked at Benjamin, waiting for him to say something. Benjamin just shook his head and went to another room, and the HR lady followed him. Matthew looked at me and asked if I was okay. And honestly, I didn't know if I was okay or not, but I definitely wasn't sad. I was angry. Yes, but I also felt something like satisfaction. Like, finally everyone knew the truth and they weren't going to be able to deny it. I left the party like 20 minutes after midnight. Matthew offered to take me home because I'd arrived with David and obviously he'd already left. On the way, we didn't talk much. I think we were both processing what had just happened. When I got to my house, David wasn't there, and I put on my pajamas, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the couch waiting for him to arrive for the inevitable conversation. But he never came that night. The next day, January 1st, like at 2 in the afternoon, David finally called me. He was furious, yelling at me on the phone saying that I'd ruined him, that I'd destroyed his reputation, that how could I do something like that to him, basically saying that everything was my fault. I asked him where he was, and he told me at a hotel that he wasn't coming home until I calmed down. I told him I had nothing to calm down about, that he was the one who'd been having an affair with his coworker, and he said it wasn't an affair, that they were just friends who'd kissed once because they were drunk. I hung up on him. During the next 2 weeks, everything went to hell for David and Ashley. Both were called to HR on the Monday after New Year's, and by Friday, they were both fired. The company's policy strictly prohibited relationships between employees because, as I found out later, they'd already had legal problems with that in the past. Plus, the fact that everything had been so public at the boss's party made it impossible to ignore. David kept calling me every day, sometimes angry saying it was my fault, other times crying and asking for forgiveness, saying he'd made a mistake and that he loved me. I hired a divorce lawyer on January 15th. There was no going back for me. Like, after years of miserable marriage and being cheated on, there was nothing left to rescue there. When David received the divorce papers like a week later, he showed up at the house crying, begging me to give him another chance, saying he was going to change, that he was going to go to therapy, that he'd do whatever. I told him it was too late, that he should have thought about that before getting involved with Ashley, and I asked him to leave. He stood at the door for like 10 minutes just looking at me with puppy dog eyes, but eventually he left. Matthew also asked Ashley for a divorce in those same weeks. He called me a couple of times to see how I was doing and to tell me that Ashley was devastated, that she'd lost her job, her marriage, and now lived with her parents because she had nowhere else to go. Honestly, I didn't feel any pity for her. Play with fire and you get burned, right? What I didn't know at that moment was that David, despite having been fired and being in the process of divorcing me, had gone to live with Ashley at her parents' house. I found out like a month later when I started receiving messages from David asking me to reconsider the divorce, saying he'd made a terrible mistake and that he missed me. At the same time, Matthew wrote to me saying that Ashley had confessed that David had told her that I was a witch who'd forced him to stay in a loveless marriage and that he really loved her. Basically, the jerk was playing both of us, telling me that he wanted to get back together with me while telling her that I was the problem. It was Matthew who gave me Ashley's contact. He told me he thought she and I should talk, because he suspected David was manipulating both of us. At first I didn't want to talk to her. Like, what for? But then I thought it could be useful, so I sent her a WhatsApp message saying we needed to talk in person. She agreed. I think she also had her doubts about David at that point. We met at a coffee shop like in mid-February, 2 months after New Year's. Ashley looked terrible, honestly. She had dark circles, had lost weight, looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. We sat down and I took out my phone, showed her all the messages David had been sending me during the past weeks. Messages where he told me he loved me, that he wanted to fix our marriage, that Ashley meant nothing to him. She turned pale and then took out her phone and showed me messages from David, where he told her that I was a horrible person, that he'd never loved me, that Ashley was the love of his life. The dates of the messages overlapped, like, he'd write to me in the morning telling me one thing and to her in the afternoon telling her something completely different. Ashley. I started crying right there in the coffee shop, and I felt a weird mix of satisfaction and pity. I told her that David was a manipulator, that he'd probably been lying to both of us from the beginning, that neither of us really mattered to him. He only cared about himself and his comfort. She told me that her parents, especially her dad Robert, had never trusted David since he came to live with them. That Robert said David was a parasite and a user. I suggested that maybe she should show her dad the messages we'd just seen, that maybe that would convince him to kick David out of the house. Ashley thanked me for showing her the truth, and we said goodbye there. We didn't become friends or anything. Like, she was still the person who got involved with my husband, but at least we both now knew who we were really dealing with. 2 days later, Matthew called me laughing, told me that Robert had kicked David out of his house after Ashley showed him the messages. Apparently, Robert literally threw his suitcases into the street and told him he never wanted to see him near his daughter again. David called me that night completely hysterical, yelling at me that it was my fault that he now had nowhere to live, that I'd ruined his life, that I was going to regret it. I told him it wasn't my problem where he lived, that he'd ruined his own life with his decisions, and I hung up on him. I blocked his number after that because I was fed up with him. During the following months, while the divorce progressed, I found out through mutual friends that David was basically living on different friends' couches, like 1 week here, 1 week there, because he didn't have money for his own apartment. He hadn't gotten another job because his reputation in the industry was ruined. Basically, everyone knew what had happened at the New Year's Eve party, and believe me, in this city, people talk. The last time I heard from him was like in June, when he sent me a super long email, because I'd blocked everything else, where he basically insulted me for 10 paragraphs, telling me I was a vengeful bitch, that I'd destroyed his life on purpose, that he hoped things went badly for me in life. All that shit. I didn't respond, just forwarded the email to my lawyer as evidence of his character for the divorce. The divorce was finalized in August, like 4 months ago. I kept the house because technically the down payment had been given by my family when we bought it, and David had no way to fight for it anyway because he didn't have money for a lawyer. We didn't have kids, so there was no custody to worry about. Basically, it was relatively simple considering everything. I had to divide some things, like bank accounts and that. But it wasn't much because David had always been terrible with money, spent more than he earned on stupid things. Now I'm living alone in the house, working, going out with friends, basically rebuilding my life. Matthew and I stay in touch. We message each other once in a while to see how everything's going, but we're not super close or anything. He also finalized his divorce with Ashley a couple of months ago. I think she's still living with her parents trying to get another job. 2 about David. I don't know anything, and honestly, I don't care. I heard somewhere that he finally got a little job at a small company earning half of what he earned before, but I haven't confirmed it, and I'm really not interested in confirming it. Last week, I was cleaning the closet and found a photo from my wedding. David and I smiling like idiots thinking we were going to be together forever. I looked at it for a while and then threw it in the trash. I didn't feel sadness or nostalgia, just felt like a relief. Like, thank God that's over. I know there are probably people who think what I did at the party was cruel or excessive, that I should have confronted him privately like a civilized person. But honestly, I don't regret anything. He decided to cheat on me. He decided to risk his job and his reputation. I just made sure the truth came out in the most effective way possible. And now I'm here, free, without having to deal with his lies or his manipulation. And that's worth more than anything.